Thank you again for being here as always. Tonight's a really exciting topic. I like to describe this to my patients as just in the same way that we've got organs in our bodies, we've got cells, and those cells have organelles. Arguably, the most important organs that we have are the brain and the heart. Of course, nothing superfluous, everything is important. But perhaps the most important organelles that our cells have are the nucleus, where the DNA resides, and the mitochondria, which, of course, is where energy is made, and also will dictate in many regards how long we'll live. And these little engines, we hear about them as being the little manufacturing plants of ATP, basically fuel everything that we do, right? But they're also vulnerable to damage, as well as modern life, toxins, not just the plumes of smoke that we see in our smokestacks in industrial world, also endotoxins, things that we make from living and breathing, and just being on planet Earth. But the exciting part, of course, is that we always have a solution for you. We're not just sort of dreaded news. With the right strategies, you can protect, you can repair, you can even grow new mitochondria and transform your entire health and health span. So tonight I'm joined, of course, with a stellar group, Dr. Adila Sapp and Justin Harris, who both, like me, take a special interest in mitochondrial function and how it applies to your health, including the genes involved, genomic pathways that impact it. How are you guys doing?
Good. Happy 2025. Glad to be here.
I heard that we're supposed to say that up until January 15th, and it's the 14th. So I think we have at least a 24-hour grace period. Happy 2025 to you guys as well.
Happy 2025. Happy to be here.
So our goal tonight, simple, guys. We want to take, the next hour or so to provide all the information that we know about this topic, at healthy years, to the lives of our guests tonight and anyone else that we come across and or who are within our ecosystem of the DNA company. Bottom line, increasing mitochondrial health means increasing health span. I don't think I'll get any argument from you guys. So as we dive in and we start sort of maybe by this journey from food that we eat and how it translates into energy in our mitochondria, because I think that's really the missed first step. Everyone talks about the longevity factor. Everyone's like, oh, add more years. And of course, energy. We hear so much about what plagues modern society with energy deficiencies, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia is on the rise, immune dysregulation, aging, in a unhealthy, we're living longer, but we're not aging as well. So, I thought maybe at least I'd give a top line. You guys jump in as you will, but the fact that when we eat, the only way we can turn what we eat in terms of macronutrients into energy is with these organelles, the mitochondria, carbohydrates, which extend well beyond grains, of course, fruits, vegetables. They're the quickest source of energy, right? The 4-4-9 rule. You guys remember that? The dreaded biology class, 11th grade. 4 calories per gram of carbs, 4 calories per gram of protein, and 9 calories per gram of fat. And yet some people do well, depending on their genes, right? They do well on a keto diet. They can actually lose weight. 25% or so, Justin, Dr. Sapp, correct me if I'm wrong, in our literature at least, with the ApoA2, not so good for that group of people. But fats from oils, nuts, animal fats and so forth, they're broken down into fatty acids that often gives this long-lasting energy. And then proteins, meat, beans, etc., turn into amino acids, which of course your body mostly uses to repair tissues, but it can also serve as a backup energy source in instances that's needed to. But anyway, once broken down, carbohydrates in particular and all these different nutrients, they travel through your bloodstream and get into your cells when you're healthy. But glucose enters a process we call glycolysis. We're not going to get into some crazy weeds about this, but this is where it's split into smaller parts that make energy. And it can't just sort of get into your cells and your cells use it. Mitochondria are the area inside the mitochondria. Glucose fragments are basically converted into this, I like to call it like a ticket, if you will, called acetyl-coenzyme A, or acetyl-CoA. And without bringing everyone back to 11th grade biology, that starts this cycle called the Krebs cycle, or the citric acid cycle, basically using, and we will talk about this a little bit later, especially when it relates to supplements, NADH and FADH. These are tools, and these tools go to basically a conveyor belt called the electron transport chain. Probably the last time you'll hear that today, but they generate a lot of energy. This is ATP, and that's the body's fuel for everything, moving muscles, thinking, being on this planet for as long as possible. So, and this is where we'll dive into the weeds, really, because this is part of the action plan, of course. And I want to hear from you guys, for everyone listening in, problems like low vitamins, low micronutrients, right? Toxins like heavy metals, accelerated aging, oxidative stress, all these slow down, block these steps. That's why we're here to talk about how you can fuel your mitochondria, protect them, divide them, multiply them through not just nutrients and micronutrient supplements, but exercise, dietary interventions and lifestyle, and a lot to explore here. We also have a poll. Please go and answer those poll questions so we get a better idea of who we're even addressing this evening. Justin, out of the gate, I know you and I have already covered this topic sometime middle to sort of maybe third quarter of last year, and you are always excited to talk about it. How do you explain this to your patients when we're talking about energy enhancement, aging better, preventing disease, etc.?
I love this topic a lot because I'm really obsessed with this idea of the human body operating like a battery. Like we talk about this electrical capacity of the human body, and the body is it's electrical and it's also bacterial. And mitochondria are so interesting because it evolved from bacteria and turned into an organelle in the eukaryotic cells. And so we've got a bacteria, which a lot of our body is made out of, creating the electrical and the biochemical that actually runs and powers the engine. It's interesting that you were saying, about toxins and exercise and vitamins and things. Really, the mitochondria act as these epigenetic sensors. They're kind of changing and reacting to the stimulus and the input that you provide. So if we have high quality input, we'll have high quality output. The mitochondria are in charge of output, but they're constantly responding and reacting to our input, which is up to us, aka epigenetics, right? That's what we talk about. We've got this wiring, but we've also got the capacity to change the expression and the wiring based on what we do. So to your point, if you have too many toxins and we can't balance our pro-oxidative activity versus our anti-oxidative activity, we get kicked out of homeostasis and we get damage to the mitochondria. That's going to directly cause accelerated aging. We've talked a lot about aging on this webinar. If you're aging way too quickly, you're at the mercy of any number of chronic diseases. So I really think that improving mitochondria gives your body this reserve of vitality that it can use to fight toxins, inflammation, etc. Dr. Sapp, do you have anything to add to that? Because we've talked about mitochondria, you and I as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You guys are both brilliant at breaking these things down, like awesome explanations. In terms of like toxicity and phase 2 detox, that's really kind of been on my radar recently because I'm working in the US. I'm originally Canadian, and just seeing the delta, between the level of toxic burden that people are dealing with right now. And also just like multi-system concerns, right? Especially energy. So I often focus on not just the input of the nutrients, but ways we can reduce your toxic burden. Because basically the more toxins you have in your bucket and the less efficiently you're clearing them, the more tired you're going to be, the more prone you are to cardiovascular disease, diabetes. It pretty much affects systems across the board. So I think of the mitochondria as, of course, the powerhouse of the cell. They produce glutathione. They're involved in ATP synthesis. Super important. But we need to reduce our free radicals and our oxidative stress, like you said. And so other than the DNA company, like it's so good to see your blueprint, right? Like what's your SOD2 look like? That's a mitochondrial gene. How's your NOS? How are your glutathione enzymes, your GSTT1, your GSTP1? But then you can also do some live tests to see like, where are you at now? What's your level of oxidative stress? And I've done that with patients. And the way I think of it is like the rust on the cells. So if your body's the car, the oxidation would be the rust around the car that's preventing it from fully functioning. And detox and reducing free radicals and oxidation would be the process of removing the rust. And I know nothing about car mechanics, so apologies. But that's kind of where I'm coming at it these days, because I see that people are completely toxed out, especially in the US, also Canada to some extent. And we just want to support energy through, like you guys were saying, nutrients, but also through infrared sauna, through NAC, through glutathione. But I will say it's a very delicate balance to get the energy right without overdoing it. So I'll just leave you guys with that. And Bryce, what do you think about the whole?
Leave us with that. That was almost a mic drop. Webinar over. Adios. Have a nice night. You covered a lot. That was amazing. You know, so we want to expand on all of that, folks. Hit up that poll, you know, get some good questions going into the Q&A section, because as you have heard, Dr. Sapp is one of the go-tos on this topic. I love that you mentioned, you know, as we're all plagued with this in North America, the relationship to metabolic disorders, you know, type 2 diabetes, type 3, right? Alzheimer's, and even obesity. I think that, and you probably experience this in your clinical practice as well, when people walk in and they've heard sort of this cute medical buzz term of the day, inflammation. We covered a lot of it at the DNA company as well, because it is the underpinning, the cause of most disease, arguably all. But mitochondrial dysfunction is way up there, if not even equivalent to this, because what we're talking about is if somebody's got neurodegenerative disease, right? Whether it's Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, ALS, it's mitochondria. Whether they've got cardiovascular disease, particularly heart failure, right? Some of the highest concentration of mitochondria are in the heart and the brain. Even atherosclerotic plaque formation. Mitochondrial dysfunction promotes, as you just described, oxidative stress, which damages blood vessels. The old story of cholesterol being the only issue, the type, size, you know, level of oxidation and cholesterol is key. But if there's inflammation to the epithelium, which we look at the DNA company from your genetic perspective, that warrants the deposition of cholesterol in the first place, right? And then we even have actual myopathies, mitochondrial myopathies, right? Besides rhabdomyolysis caused by, you know, statin drugs that lower cholesterol. Then there's the big C. So besides chronic fatigue, of course, the other big C is cancer. So, I mean, we can go on and on. Autism, a bunch of age-related stuff, kidney dysfunction. Of course, there's a huge concentration of mitochondria in kidney. I like to distill it down to this, though. I like to say sort of this trifecta, or three primary, I would say, ways in which we could improve or optimize mitochondrial function when we hear this laundry list of conditions that dysfunction relates to. One, and this is where we'll talk more, biogenesis. We can make more of these. This process involves duplicating your mitochondria. That's what they do. They can duplicate. You know, Justin, you mentioned it earlier, this process of I believe it's called endosymbiotic theory, or what eukaryotes engulfed mitochondria. We lived together, single organisms. We can't live without them now, but we can multiply them, or we can help multiply them. Then, of course, improving efficiency. What do? They make ATP. We can improve those efficiencies. But this is one that a lot of people are starting to catch on to, particularly biohackers, and that is increasing or activating mitophagy, which is helping them die when they're supposed to die, so the new ones come in. That's the way I like to think about these, and we'll talk about, of course, the strategies of how to enhance that. But that's kind of another buzz term of the day, Justin, mitophagy. And for folks that, of course, are joining us tonight that don't know what that means, what does it mean?
So mitophagy is a little bit different than biogenesis, right? They need to die, and then new ones need to be created, right? So there's kind of almost a shelf life, you could call it, to all of our cells. They have to die and they have to be replicated. You have to make new ones. If you don't make new ones, you're actually aging a lot faster, right? Because you have old kind of junky cells. So, you know, there's a lot of different things that you can do to improve that. We talk about fasting, you know, increasing the NAD levels, which we'll get into a little bit later. But mitophagy itself is the dying off of old possibly damaged mitochondria. Then biogenesis is the creation of new ones, which has a direct anti-aging effect on the body. So both of those are really important.
Right. Dr. Saab, why don't you lead us through the poll questions? We love to do this because people, have specific areas of interest. And what we like to do is, as we do with single N of 1 patients, personalized medicine, we like to personalize our webinars. And how we do that is by getting insights from people who are joining and how they answer our polls. So what are we seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm seeing it's not better to run via ketosis as opposed to carbtosis. Bryce, I don't know if you have an answer for that one.
Oh, that's our questions, but should we pull up the polls?
Okay.
And I love that question. I'm going to stew on that. I can't wait to answer that question. Keep them coming, folks.
Got it.
If
Okay.
you want to pull open the polls and just run down, starting with mitochondrial health, give us what we're looking at when we've asked the question, how familiar are you with the role of mitochondria in overall health? Because we've got a bell curve going here.
Yeah, so we have 1% of people who've never heard of it. Then we've got 30% who say, I know a little, but want to learn more. 53%, about half of you understand the basics, but want actionable strategies. And then 16% are well-versed and looking for advanced insights. So when it comes to actionable strategies, Bryce, I can talk about some of the sort of biohacking strategies or like foundational functional medicine strategies for improving mitochondrial health. But what would you say are like your main go-tos? For me, it's optimizing the organs of elimination. And that's through the urine, through regular bowel movements, getting regular oxygen, sometimes infrared sauna. So there's numerous ways we detox and just like making sure those are all intact. And then adding nutrients, improving nutrient status, and then even specialized nutrients like our mitochondrial optimizer. There's a number of really good ones on the market. That was the first one I ever tried. And I gotta say, I felt the effects right away. It's awesome. But yeah, what would you say are some of your go-tos with clients, Bryce?
So I take the individualized approach every time, as we all do here. So appreciating their individual genomics, and to your point, especially when I see compromised detox pathways, and those would be the ones you alluded to earlier: glutathionization, GST-T1, GST-M1, GST-P1, SOD2, the oxidative antioxidant pathway. All these are relevant to determine what one's individual ability to manage those things that impede on this energy production, that speed up their aging, that lead toward or predispose them to chronic diseases that we've aforementioned. So it's always getting that genetic insight, on top of which, as you've also suggested, the real-time testing. I'm a huge fan of bookending. I want to know what my interventions are doing from a clinical perspective. So one that I've tended to do quite some frequent repeat testing for my patients, both those that are challenges, I need some deep insights, and even those that are just sort of looking to optimize. I do a lot of sports. I see a lot of individual and professional sports, so they need more energy on the fly, and their professions are quite demanding. And I love the NutriVal. This is a test that's both urine and blood from Genova Diagnostics, and the reason I love it is it looks at over 150 endpoints. And by endpoint, I mean micronutrient status, what are, the various essential, non-essential amino acids that are floating around, the micronutrients, the cofactors involved in all this. Gives me a snapshot of what's happening now. Then I can bookend it, right? Before and after. And of course, make recommendations that are individualized. But, and this is really wanted to come full circle and emphasize what you just said, and that is, one of the best ways, whether your detox profile is beautiful and you're genetically blessed or not, they can impede any and all of us when it comes to toxic burden and load. We know about bisphenol A and plasticizers. We know about, the ethereal toxins, heavy metals that really stopgap this process from the mitochondria being able to work. But glyphosate and other pesticides that are ubiquitous in our environment. I mean, crazy stuff. Like, last stats I looked at was, I think we've got in North America alone 1.6 billion metric tons of glyphosate floating in and around our environment through our foods. You know, it's never kind of going away. And scientists used to think, oh, don't worry about it. It really only affects plants. And, you know, interrupts, you know, plant processes. They came to learn that it actually affects bacteria, right? Particularly our gut bacteria, not to mention antibiotics, by the way. I know I'm a bit on a tangent here, but you just made me think. And, you know, but what we've realized is besides our gut bacteria, glyphosate, this is the Monsanto pesticide, obviously, affects our mitochondria through very measured biochemical pathways. And so we can't really even get away from it, you know, and you might be, you know, into eating organic, which we all should be, but, you know, regulators allow for antibiotic use in organic feeds when, you know, a single chicken may be sick. You know, you can use antibiotics in the whole lot of them. So we can't get away from this stuff as best as we try. So we want to enhance, as you described, and then I'll hand it over to Justin for any sort of tidbits of what, you know, insights that he's got. But you know, I really feel that getting a hold on and managing the efficiencies for which we pee it out, poop it out, sweat it out, breathe it out. Phase 2. So I love what you said earlier, maximizing phase 2, making stuff that we ingest or get exposed to water soluble so as not to have as much as a mitochondrial burden is part and parcel. Name of the game here. How about you, Jess?
Those are all really good for starters. I would definitely mirror everything that Bryce just said. An area that I go to that's kind of interesting, I mentioned pro versus antioxidative ratio in the body. And I was thinking about this. The body makes toxins, right? So endogenously, we make toxins, and then we also take in toxins. The body makes antioxidants, and then we eat the rest as well, right? So we're taking them in and we make them for both toxins and antioxidants. The way that an antioxidant neutralizes a free radical is it actually lends an electron to it. Usually a free radical is deficient in an electron and antioxidants are rich in them, and it'll sort of gift an electron and neutralize it. So it's kind of an interesting balancing act going on there. And that's why we look at the genes to understand where your genetic weak points are, because we may need to add additional interventions into a weak point, because then the endogenous creation of these free radicals is going to be more than it might be for someone else. So we've got to kind of target it that much more. This is one of those fundamental homeostatic mechanisms that I'm always talking about. We don't want zero pro-oxidative effects in the body. You're never going to get zero pro-oxidative effects in the body, but we want to balance it out, because if that ratio goes off, then you're going to end up with accelerated membrane issues and ultimately mitochondrial damage and DNA damage as well. So when it comes to, you know, you talked about testing through Genova. That's a great company. A cool marker you can look at as well for this is called 8-OHDG, which is hydroxydeoxyguanosine.
That's exactly the marker I was looking at. Yeah, good call. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's a marker that's going to talk about DNA damage from these free radicals. So you can actually measure that in the urine and know if you've been kind of kicked out of balance there. So once again, Justin keeps saying homeostasis. I'm going to get it tattooed on my forehead because it is my favorite word when it comes to health. Very important, yin and yang. And I think it really is relevant for mitochondria.
Well, besides oxidative stress, I think you'd agree, Dr. Sapp, that a hormetic level of stress, whether it's slight oxygen deprivation or it's, you know, the, you know, intense action that comes through exercise, it's putting enough of a burden on mitochondria that's another way in which we can multiply them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that was also such a good point, Justin, about the balance, because when it comes to toxic burden, I find that people are so overwhelmed. Like they get into kind of extremism where they think we have to avoid all toxins. They're all killing us. You know, it's all, you know, we have to avoid them all. But it's really about the balance, right, between the good inputs and the free radicals. So we can't avoid it all. But a resource that I often send people to is Environmental Working Group, because it gives you like a dirty dozen, right? If you can't afford to eat all organic, you can at least avoid the most pesticided crops. There's a Clean 15, you may be able to buy those conventional. But if I was someone in the audience, like looking for actionable steps, I would probably start with looking at my blueprint, my DNA. As a clinician, it's super useful. But even as a client, like when I first got my genetic insights, when I first worked at the DNA company back in the day, Bryce remembers Mississauga, you know, the little office there. It was pretty mind-blowing. It actually took a little while to kind of process my results because it just explains so much, but yet there's so much that you can do based on those results. So I would look at kind of my genotype, and then I would probably also, let's say you're really tired, because that's like one of the top symptoms. Like people have brain fog and they're exhausted. Those are two of the kind of top symptoms of mitochondrial dysfunction, along with everything else. I'd look at my genes and then I'd go see a functional medicine doctor. Maybe I do some of the tests that show me where I'm at right now, like the marker you just brought up, Justin. And then I would start implementing from there to get a more targeted approach. Because let's say you're exhausted, it could be that you have horrible methylation. It could be related to your cognitive or your mental health, which is another section of the report. It could be related to your diet and metabolism. So it could be related to so many different areas. So how do we pinpoint the mitochondrial genes and which supplements to take? It's great to know your blueprint, where you're coming from genetically. So just to add that.
No question. You know, this brings me back to, I wrote my first book, 2007. I was interviewing Dr. Andy Weil, big bearded. Please tell me you guys both know who that
Yes,
is.
absolutely. Yeah.
And I was asking him in that interview for the book what his favorite test at the time. It was obscure, no one had heard of it, and he said 8-OHDG. And he said, and by the way, it's still relevant. It's a little less accurate to look at something called malondialdehyde, but it's a super inexpensive surrogate marker. And to your point, Justin, absolutely, urine is the way to look at 8-OHDG. It's the most stable. So anyone doing blood or any other methodology is probably not that accurate, but great insights to the oxidative stress or damage to our very DNA. And I just wanted to add to what you said, Dr. Sapp, in terms of informed decisions and focused decisions based on genomic insights. That's what we're all about, right? I mean, you can't, a couple of slogans are going to come out here. Can't change your DNA, but you can manage genetic expression. Your health is an investment, never an expense. And when you kind of put all that together and you have your genetic aptitude, you know what your genes are, you can, and by investment, I don't just mean financial, time. I mean, you could do all of these things, organic and exercise and, you know, sleep hygiene, all these, but, you know, a lot of us don't have all of the hours in the day to get every single one of those elements accomplished. So how do we know what we need to focus on? That's what we mean by informed by DNA. So as to spend the time, energy, and finances to understand, is it the clean 15? Is it my, you know, cosmetics? Is it a certain ingredient or supplement I could, like, what are these things that are going to make the most impact in this case on my mitochondria? In the poll, we're also seeing that, based on a question, what do you currently do to support your energy levels? That people, when they have the choice to answer more than one question, they are focusing on their diet. Congratulations, prioritizing movement. That's a non-negotiable, and taking supplements. Only a small percentage haven't done much and they want to start. And so that's amazing. And then when it comes to mitochondrial health interests, we're seeing a bit of a split between energy, vitality, and chronic health issues, fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, et cetera. But the winner here, by the way, 0 people talked about athletic performance. It's a big percentage of the patients that I'll see is the wellness seekers looking to go from good to better. But by and large, when people don't know this, when they have a chronic health issue, it's probably, at least in part, related to their mitochondria. But aging and longevity is taking the cake here. 55% saying aging and longevity they want to know more about. So let's make sure we get to that. And then what the biggest challenge that most experience related to energy and vitality, age-related decline. In mental health, that's the brain fog you were talking about, Dr. Sapp. And some are answering chronic fatigue, low physical energy. That would be, I suppose, physical musculature, ability to move, push, pull, jump, squat, lift. and maybe run. What are you doing in your practice for that brain fog? I mean, first and foremost, besides all the assessments, the genetic aptitude, personalized medicine, what are some of the known enhancers for mitochondria that seem to have the most impact on this brain fog? Is there any sort of?
Yeah. Yeah, so glutathione, obviously, that's the most obvious one, right? But it does really help to know your genetics for that one, as you guys could attest to, because certain genes make you more likely to get a good response to intravenous glutathione. Others make you less likely to get a good response. That is one thing that we're doing in our practice. There's also oral glutathione. If people are more likely to get a reaction, because it all depends on your toxic burden and your sensitivity to different supplements and medications. People here are often so toxed out that even supplements will send them over the edge. It's not just medications. So you have to really like titrate up. NAC I found has like a lower side effect profile than glutathione. So you can start with that because it's a precursor. And then other than that, there's all kinds of specialized supplements. Like I have one of mine right in front of me. Some of them are in the mitochondrial optimizer, but acetyl L-carnitine is a good one. You can even get superoxide dismutase, which like directly produces ATP in supplement form. You can get different ingredients that just help you detox and therefore help mitochondrial function, like apple peat. There's coenzyme Q10, PQQ, tocotrienols, which are forms of vitamin E. So straight conventional vitamin E, there's some research that it's not always great long-term, whereas mixed tocotrienols, which is another form of vitamin E, is really good. But also the basics are huge, like sleep, right? The foundations of health. Sleep, oxygen. This is one that people are forgetting all the time. Like a lot of people are working in sealed buildings. Like, what do you need for your cells and your mitochondria to function? You need oxygen. You need it for your brain to function. And hydration, you know, the recommendation here now is over 92 ounces. And I don't know exactly what that is in liters. I've become Americanized. Bryce, I don't know, a couple liters.
Yeah, the rhetorical sort of
Yeah.
8 liters, but as we
Big
both
glasses,
all know,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
as we all know, that may not be for everybody.
Yeah, depending on the individual, of course.
Did I just
And
say 8 liters? I meant say 2
you said
liters, 8
8
glasses.
liters. You said 8 liters. I was like,
Two,
oh,
two.
good. Okay,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's called kidney failure.
Water
Let's be
intoxication is the thing if you drink too much water. But anyways, yeah, lots of water, lots of sleep, and then the advanced practices like infrared, dry sauna, titrating up. So the thing with glutathione and detox and all of this is you have to titrate up. It's like working out. You can't just become like an Olympic athlete going from 0 to 100. And I've had patients who do that and it doesn't end well. So yeah, the advanced practices, titrating up, sauna, even cryotherapy and cold therapy and cold water exposure,
Well,
hydrotherapy, those will all help.
now you got Justin itching
Yeah.
because he heard light, he heard cryo, he heard heat. Just go for it, man. Like, I mean, these are, kind of new scientific findings, right? That, these organelles respond and reactivate through all types of, well, specific spectrum lights, but all types of different energy exposures. Why don't you give us a list of those?
Yeah, like these hormetic stressors, right? Like our body, as we alluded to, the goal isn't to totally reduce stress all the way down to zero because there are positive adaptations that happen when we introduce stress. Light is actually a form of that, right? The sunshine is a hormetic stressor. The mitochondria react directly to being in the sunlight, which has a few different like spectrums in there. There's yellow and there's red. And so, the mitochondria, they react to the stimulus that you provide. I have this concept that I've actually spoken about with Dr. Sapp on one of these webinars where I talked about moving from general to specific, right? And I think that's an important concept because a lot of practitioners, doctors, etc., start at the specific and maybe work towards general, but maybe don't even get there, right? Like laser focus in on the mitochondria. I like to start general with my clients, because if you're vaping and sitting, like you don't do anything but play video games, your mitochondria don't have a lot of a reason to replicate and die off and do these good things. You're not giving it the right input. Garbage in, garbage out. That's the way that's going to work. So we need to start with the absolute basics, like Dr. Sapp said: sleeping, moving your body, eating high quality food, right? Because if we're poisoning ourselves, it's simply going to trickle down into the mitochondria, and the cells are going to have worse expression. And then I'll move into even things like positive thought. You know, our friend Dr. Porter talked about it actually influences 3,200 different gene expressions just by having positive thought versus negative thought, because your cells are going to express accordingly. They don't know the difference between a real danger and a perceived danger. So I'll start there, general as it gets. Are you thinking positively? Are you moving your body? Are you hydrated? Do you have enough minerals? Then we get all biohacky from there, right? Now let's get cold. Now let's get hot. Let's get some high quality minerals, like from our friends at Beam, right? Really bioavailable minerals, because that's going to aid that electron transport chain. I did mention it, Bryce. You said we weren't going to mention it again. But minerals, right? Different things that the body and the mitochondria need: micronutrients, minerals, antioxidants, like we say. So start real general, but then get real crazy: hot, cold, minerals, grounding, PEMF, red light, right? Introducing these spectrums on purpose, and everything else. You know, I have whole coaching sessions just about mitochondria.
Yeah, I love that whole general to specific concept. It's also the opposite of how a lot of medical practitioners were trained. I do think it relates to the health status as well of the individual. Like if they're kind of subpar and they don't have the basics down, then you start general, right? With some of my patients, they've come in like truly, truly sick, and they have like very specific drivers for their fatigue. So I will say, like, if you're just regular tired, like a lot of these things will work for you. But if you have like debilitating chronic fatigue, which is becoming more and more common, I see in number 4, what's your biggest challenge related to energy? 27% of you wrote constant fatigue or low energy. There often is like a very specific driver. So for some people, it's been they had mercury, like they had a high level of mercury in their system for whatever reason. And in Washington State, being a very, wet, dark in the winter state, although absolutely gorgeous if you've never visited, mold is huge. Like I'm seeing it all the time in practice. I honestly thought that the dangers were exaggerated for a while, but I'm seeing it causes multi-system issues, especially debilitating fatigue. So you want to get tested for, the basics for what your naturopathic doctor or MD in functional medicine, whatever they are, if they're specialized, you're going to want to get tested if it's truly a debilitating thing. And then another resource I would suggest is there's a doctor called Dr. Sarah Myhill. Sarah Myhill, I can put her in the chat. She's an amazing expert from the UK in chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. So she talks a lot about what Bryce was talking about, and Justin, just about increasing your nutrient status. And you basically have to like load up on those nutrients, but the right ones, quality ones, vetted supplements, because there's a lot of counterfeits. And then you use a clinician to like do testing and get more specific afterwards. But yeah.
Yeah, I want to talk about a bit about those, all very excellent, valid points. I want to talk about a bit of those we've referred to a little earlier, at least teased, rate limiting steps. See, let's get the basics corrected to your point, the micronutrients that allow this to happen, and then add some other stuff in. And then to Justin's point, add the biohacking in. So kind of want to do this in a bit of a hierarchical process. But I also want to acknowledge and underscore the importance of ruling out infection. You mentioned mold. I mean, typically chronic fatigue, think chronic infection, which could be yeast, bacteria, mold, viruses, lingering viruses. I mean, chronic fatigue, it took so many years for scientists and clinicians to come to the realization that there's often reactivation syndrome involved, Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, herpes simplex family, et cetera, or even multitude of these things, and certainly molds. I'm seeing in my own clinical practice, actually, which is a low-grade chronic infection, what we affectionately refer to as leaky gut, right? I mean, when there's a translocation, stuff that enters into general circulation that shouldn't be there, has no right to be there in the first place. Everything from, unbroken down food particles through to fractions of bacteria, the immune system sent on alert. And it's not any sort of minor degree of energy utilization for that to happen. It's huge. I mean, when anyone has the flu, it's, having that brain fog, the malaise, the, muscles that ache, that sort of desire to just sleep all day. That's not just the infection doing that to you. The mitochondria is distracted, trying to heal you, but by fueling your immune cells to do the job that they're supposed to do. That's incredibly taxing. It uses a lot of energy. Same with this sort of low grade, infection, if you will, or inflammation in the gut due to a dysbiosis or other potentially, infectious origins like yeasts and potentially pathogenic bacteria in the gut. So I'm seeing a lot of that. I'm seeing a lot of citric acid cycles. Okay, sorry, you into that biology there, but Krebs cycle, the downstream ATP production interrupted by, or at least concomitant or comorbid to, leaky gut. I see that so often. And by the way, even a single course of antibiotics, broad spectrum, so many clinicians, doctors are using those as sort of a Hail Mary too often, and it's killing our microbiome. And some that are predisposed, we do a lot of pharmacogenetics testing at the DNA company, which, drugs are going to work best for you. In clinical practice, we also do a lot of stool microbiome. We do that at the DNA company as well. This all plays a role. Anyway, maybe I digress a little bit. These steps, this production of ATP, I mean, helpers that are needed sort of top down are B3, often forgot about. We'll unpack next, I hope, the genes related to, let's say, methylation. We talked a bit about detox and SOD, but some of these other genes, the letter vitamins are relevant here. But B3 is huge. You can't make NAD, which then fuels the production of ATP without B3, obviously. And then certain toxins like arsenic can mess that step up, right? Then you have the fatty acids we talked about, they join in. You mentioned, Dr. Sapp, carnitine earlier. Acetyl L-carnitine in particular actually might help to, sort of shuttle, if you will, carnitine for fats, for example. But if you're low, you can't use fats as energy, even if you try the keto diet and your ApoE2 is optimal. And then, of course, this sort of next step where we're, using B1, coenzymes like B5, alpha lipoic acid, which is why it's in our formula. But then you have heavy metals like mercury screwing up that step. So it's kind of full circle to our make sure you test, understand what you're low for, understand what's maybe interrupting the step. But B3, B2, the whole B family, they love to work in concert, right? In order to, get Justin's electron transport chain fueled up. And we need that oxygen and coenzyme Q2. By the way, some of the impetus to this formula, the mitochondrial optimizer, is in this effort to make sure we fuel discrepancies in SOD2 superoxide dismutase. It's a manganese-driven enzyme. So we added manganese because a lot of us, due to soil rotation issues, same with magnesium, are deficient in manganese. Ubiquinol to protect the mitochondria from oxidative stress. Vitamin E, but specific to the mixed tocotrienols you mentioned, Dr. Sapp, help to protect against that burden. And then PQQ to help multiply the mitochondria. Let's make them divide and do more of what they're supposed to do. So nutrient deficiencies, know what's there or not. Toxins, know what's there or not. And of course, as you get older, you're going to have fewer mitochondria, right, Jess? I mean, your levels naturally drop, but they don't have to.
They naturally drop. NAD levels naturally drop. Creatine production naturally drops. Sleep, quality tends to drop if you don't do something about it. And to your point, everything is connected, right? Like I've talked about this concept of the butterfly effect in the body before, because you mentioned leaky gut, which is so pervasive. It's the mucosal layer, thins and wears away. Having some sort of mucosal barrier assessment is usually a really good call in my experience, because you can kind of see if it's compromised or not. If you have an infection, it's probably a result of the problem as opposed to the problem itself. Usually the terrain itself is corrupted before that, right? So it can be a chicken or the egg kind of a conversation. But let's say you do have a compromised gut. Well, most of your melatonin is made in your gut, and melatonin obviously helps you sleep, but it's also one of the primary antioxidants in your body, right? So it'll actually aid the SOD2 pathway in clearing free radicals from the mitochondria. This is what the term holistic really should mean. It's a little bit buzzwordy, but to me, holistic means all the systems of the body lead into the next system. And if one thing gets compromised, it's going to have a bleeding effect into something else. So what's the connection, right? How could your gut impact your melatonin and therefore your detox capacity? That's how it works, right? So, T3 to T4 conversion, a lot of that happens in your gut. We could go on and on here, but you have to know what your genetic weak points are, because you have to know what need be reinforced. If you're just doing things willy-nilly and throwing mom's spaghetti at the wall, you're going to waste a lot of money in the first place. But secondly, you're not going to actually know what needs to be reinforced at an absolute baseline. Your genes are your factory setting. So we need to know where to install better quality software into that hardware. Then we can take care of the problem, right? So just so everybody knows as well, I'm going to put a different hat on for a second. We do have a discount on the DNA 360 right now. I believe it's $65 off. You don't need any crazy code or anything. But if you haven't had DNA 360, I can't recommend it enough, because that's how we're going to know where some of these weak points are.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Justin, because like I said, some of the B vitamins, like Dr. Bryce was talking about, they can affect your methylation cycle. Maybe that's the weak link. Maybe the weak link is more specifically your mitochondria. Maybe it's more related to phase 1 detox and the GSTT1 enzymes more than your SOD2 gene. So you really want to isolate it. It really helps. It really helps as a clinician as well. I love it when people give me their genetic reports, even though it's extra unpaid work. I'm like, yes, this is great. Like, we're going to make progress. It'll be quicker. It's almost like a cheat sheet, right, to someone's body. And hopefully we'll be covered by insurance soon. I don't know if any of you are working on that, but that would be amazing. But yeah, on that note, just like that, everything's connected. I think the last webinar I did was on mental health even, and we didn't bring that up, but even mitochondrial health could even affect mental health. Vitamins like B3 and niacin are so important for mental health. So if there's any kind of deficiency there, that can directly have an impact. If you're not methylating, if you're not clearing toxins, and then if you're not producing enough cellular energy, your brain may be more tired, you may be more prone to depression. There's all kinds of other things, or brain fog, which could lead to, an ADHD diagnosis. And so there's all kinds of downstream effects in almost every system of the body. So if you do have overwhelming fatigue, it is a pain in some ways to deal with as a doctor, because you literally have to rule out so many things. But if you figure out where that fatigue is coming from, you're going to be helping your whole body down the line. And you might even live longer, as Bryce had brought up. So, yeah.
Living longer is part of the objective, but certainly health span, living longer and optimal health is more important. And in my opinion, I think all of our opinion. And yes, to summarize, the methylation genes, SHMT1, MTHFR, MTR, MTRR, POMT, fecal transferase indirectly, these are all relevant. Like you said, anytime you're dropping the proverbial baton in this cycle, you're impairing mitochondrial function. You're reducing particularly the NAD recycling, which then leads to inefficient energy production, the currency of energy being ATP. SOD2, we talked about that increased reactive oxygen species or free radicals that impair that electron transportine, you don't get the same ATP production. But even other genes that are relevant to some of our nutrition panel, like FTO, ApoA2, helps us out decide and sort of customize what any given client would do best by from a macronutrient perspective. If you have a reduced fat oxidation and impaired energy metabolism, given your APO, or rather your FTO variant, pretty directly leads to mitochondrial dysfunction and increased fat accumulation. I mean, this is how we know. And then the TCF7L2 gene indirectly, but reduced glucose availability, or that glycolysis or Krebs cycle, or whatever, however you want to refer to it, downstream, it impairs mitochondrial function. So you're right. Point is that there's not a single gene that doesn't have some direct or indirect function to what our mitochondria is doing or has the inability to do. Even UCP1, by the way, that's actually
I was literally about to bring that one up.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, no, tell us, I mean, tell everyone what it does and how we look at it.
Yeah, if you have a suboptimal version, it would make you more likely to gain weight. And that one ties directly to mitochondrial function as well. So if you happen to have that variation, and your free radicals were clogging up the wheels in your oxidative stress system, you'd be more likely to gain weight. So some people, it all depends on like the combination of genes, right? But if someone's totally toxed out and they have a suboptimal version there, they may be more prone to gain weight. So, yeah.
And Justin, how do we upregulate UCP1, brother?
So there's a little bit of debate about this, because some people say that if you have suboptimal UCP1, that you shouldn't dabble in any kind of temperature manipulation, right? Because it does play a role in thermoregulatory action in the body. I'm going to be a bit controversial. I've actually done the opposite, myself as well, with just like a little bit of cold exposure as well as heat exposure. I also think that things like breath work, like just ways to kind of charge up your own body temperature a little bit, is of use. If you do have, let's say, a suboptimal UCP1 and you choose to mess around with some cold exposure, just know that you're going to have to do a little extra to, and I don't mean extra time in cold, I'm saying a little bit extra to warm yourself back up. So maybe you have a little, I don't know, a cayenne pepper tea before you do it, and jump on a trampoline and do a little breath work, get on a vibration plate afterwards, do some kettlebell swings, something to warm yourself back up. But I actually think that you should dabble in a little bit of temperature manipulation just to expose your body to it, to make your body have to react and upregulate the expression of the mechanism itself, because it's useful, right? I mean, when we're talking about mitochondria, I do think that getting cold and getting hot are two things that directly have that hormetic effect on them, right? So we want to find ways that you can do it. But that's why we're biohackers as well, right? Because, to your point, Bryce, if you have suboptimal ApoA2, but for whatever reason you need to go on a higher fat diet for a period of time, let's look at the gene, understand what it does, and then maybe we do use some carnitine just to improve it a little bit, right? Push the fat into the mitochondria a little bit better. Maybe we're going to use some lipase, get some fat absorbing enzymes like lipase in there. Maybe we'll take some ketones. Maybe we'll pair it with some fasting, something, right? Like there's always, if there's a will, there's a way here, right? So just know your blueprint. And if you're not going to operate within your blueprint, add a couple of strategies in to have less metabolic consequence to operating outside of your blueprint.
Yeah, no, excellent points. All right, well, we're almost at the top of the hour and we've covered a lot. What do you guys think about getting into some questions? And we've got a bunch of them here. Encourage anyone who's with us tonight, thanks again for joining, to ask those questions in the Q&A section, not in the chat. We'll do our best to come back to chat. We've got a Julia asking, what are the pros and cons of using molecular hydrogen regularly? Wonder if there are any risks. Dr. Sapp, what are your thoughts?
Oh God, molecular hydrogen. I don't know if either of you guys have this. This is one of those up and coming treatments that I haven't yet used. And I will admit my knowledge is limited. I don't know about you, Justin.
Yeah, I've got a few things to say about it, because I am a fan of activating that NRF2 pathway as a way of aiding the clearance of free radicals out of the mitochondria. And that's what hydrogen does. there's definitely a difference between methods here, like the tablets versus the water bottles versus the machines. Personally, I'm a fan of the tablets. It usually comes from an ionized form of magnesium, and when it touches the water, it changes and it turns it into really hydrogen-rich water. Then you have to guzzle it really quick because it's a gas now, so it'll leave and just be a normal glass of water again. We are activating a particular antioxidant pathway that could be overdone. Once again, like I say, this is a pro versus an antioxidation conversation, right? So I don't think you should do every glass of water have hydrogen rich. You should have some normal water now and again as well. My recommendation is to pair it with something that initiates phase 2 detox, right? So I actually do the hydrogen surrounding my sauna practice, right? So I'll load the mitochondria with that, activate the NRF2 pathway, and then I'll initiate some sweating. But honestly, water has hydrogen in there anyways, just a normal glass of water, right? So I think the risk profile is pretty friggin' small unless you're doing unreal amounts. You would probably reach a magnesium limit before you would reach a hydrogen limit. And you would know because there's a bowel tolerance with that. So I don't think there's too much risk involved, but know that you need to get phase 1 and phase 2 detox in a good little balance there. So have something with it, sweat, go to the bathroom, do those kinds of things, and it'll help.
Nice.
Yeah, I would only add to that. I think that, especially given genomic insights, there may be, of course, this is, an ROS neutralizer. I think there may, in fact, be better antioxidants. I think that there's little cons. I don't think, to your point, I think I would just echo what you said, Justin. But my biggest issue is there's some good science, but I feel like the efficacy versus some other things that we're looking to do, it's in this case anyways, to upregulate mitochondrial biogenesis, autophagy, and protection. There's probably better things and certainly more evidence-based things. That's my 2 cents on that one. Then Corey's asking about working with a Dr. Tim Jackson. Okay. I can't remember the website for the oxygen hydrogen unit he breathes in to help him with his mitochondria. Right. The molecular hydrogen devices, in question for absorbing. So I think this was in a podcast actually that he, what's that guy's name? Mateo Johnson. Did you watch this, Justin? Anyways, he's an expert in molecular hydrogen. He has this, the 2 hydrogen generation machine. I don't know. I don't know enough about this to know that it's really, class 2 medical device or class 1 medical device or anything, but it produces hydrogen gas for inhalation. And again, maybe this is supporting mitochondrial function, right? So there's all these different models. I can't remember Aquafina or not Aquafina. That's water, bottled water. Aquacare or something like that. I remember this. He mentioned a couple of models where, again, you might be able to infuse them. I'm with you, though, Justin. I think you're going to do this. You do it in a tablet form, save your money, and probably just, throw that into your water, shake and drink real quick. Because, of course, it's, going to become do you have any feedback? Like, is there anything that about Dr. Tim Jackson's stuff that he's promoting?
I can't say I do. However, I do think that there is some logic to breathing it in. There's a lot of
insufflation, right? Ben Greenfield.
Yeah, insufflation. Yeah. And it's like, you can nebulize glutathione and exosomes, and there's a lot of bioavailability when you take it in via the respiratory tract. So I do think it makes sense. It's just that I think the science isn't quite hashed out when it comes to hydrogen and all the best ways to do it. I'll share a couple of the resources I go to. Tyler LeBaron is a good guy as far as a wealth of knowledge on hydrogen. Dr. Robert Slovak is amazing, as well as Dr. Joseph Mercola. Most of us know him. They've all got some pretty good literature there when it comes to hydrogen and the efficacy. But as far as I'm concerned, most of them say that you get way more parts per million out of the tablets than you do out of the majority of these machines. Parts per million is what really matters, right? Because that's the actual density of hydrogen in it. Normal water has hydrogen in it anyways, right? So the density is what we're really looking for. And as far as I've seen, the tablets are the most efficacious way of going about that.
So I had to look at my phone real quick because there was one guy, I interviewed this guy 6 years ago now. I couldn't believe what he knew about molecular hydrogen. It was I've never seen any, and he pulled up all the references and he pulled up all of the scientific literature. And even back then I was super impressed. His name is Alex Parnava. And I played golf with him one day, and we were paired up because somebody knew that I was interested in this kind of stuff. And anyway, just he blew me away. I think he sells hydrogen tablets, the ones you were describing, Justin. We have zero affiliation. I met him once, but looking him up, maybe you'll come across some of the literature on this. Alex Tarnav. I still have him in my phone.
And now I'm curious if you've tried these tablets, Justin, because I gotta say you're glowing, which is often a sign that you've detoxed, right? You seem pretty vital.
Yeah, and I've dabbled in different companies. Mercola himself makes one, and I typically trust him, so that's a good one to use. There's another called Active H2, and I believe Dr. Robert Slovak, who I mentioned, is actually associated with that company. He makes this thing called Quinton as well, which if you've never seen that, that's an amazing mineral resource. It comes from these freshwater plankton blooms. It's satellite monitored, and it's actually the only substance that has every element on the periodic table in it, and it mimics human blood plasma really closely. So if you ever get a chance, look up Dr. Robert Slovak Quinton. He's got a lot of cool stuff to say about minerals found in the ocean. The Active H2, that's a really good one as well, but I'm not super duper married to any particular brand.
Okay, I'll check that out. And yeah, Kelly, the marker I just put in the chat was 8OHDG. And also just a quick shout out to Corey, who's from Western Washington. Hey.
Nice. Eka Lee is asking if one has mercury amalgams on board, that would be silver mercury fillings. Is there a way to long-term reverse long-term the effects of mercury on mitochondria short of removal and metal detoxification? So let's unpack it. Actually, this was you're talking about earlier, Dr. Sepp. I think if there's two things that were probably contributing most to mercury load, it would be amalgam fillings. They're still being put in some people's mouths. My wife's a biological dentist. There's like 9 other dentists in the family. I know a lot about teeth and this topic, but and then sushi eaters, right? You were mentioning environmental working group. The larger the fish, the higher the mercury. I mean, mercury is also one of those ubiquitous things. It's everywhere. And there's no safe levels. This was early studies by University of Calgary. It's been repeated multiple times. No safe levels in the human body. It's bioaccumulative. It will store in fat cells. Another reason why we're always cautious about losing weight too quickly or losing fat tissue too quickly. It'll recirculate. But what are, it has immediate and acute effects, even when it's recirculated. The body's incredible about reabsorbing this stuff. It shouldn't be, but it's like when it is disposed of, glutathione, et cetera, phase 2, and then it's in the gut, it tends to be resorbed, right? Which is why it's important to do things like bentonite clay and activated charcoal in your detox protocols. But what about the long-term reversing? What are the recommendations you have on somebody who's had a hyper exposure, maybe carrying these mercury fillings in for a long period of time?
Yeah, so actually my first year here in the US, I was mostly working with dentists, and biological dentists are awesome. But the conventional dentists are exposed to lots of stuff, including vapors from mercury and various other chemicals that they work with. Now, mercury's fallen out of favor, but it's not actually banned. So that's still actually happening, surprisingly. Use of mercury regularly. But chelating agents like DMSA, as well as titrating up on sauna. There's other chelating agents. There are things that like release heavy metals from the body. There's EDTA, DMPS. The one I use is DMSA. But I will say that you have to go very slow. It's a very delicate art. So if you do have high levels of heavy metals in your body, I would definitely recommend working with someone like 100%. That's an area you don't want to mess around, because if you start a chelating agent, you have a huge amount recirculating in your body of like mercury, you're going to get sick, you're going to have major brain fog, you might have digestive issues, you might have skin issues, like the list goes on. So you just have to, it's a very delicate balance. But often taking these agents and taking breaks. So like I'll have someone who's like 3 days on the chelating agent and then 10 days off, and then 3 days on, 10 days off. Taking breaks is huge so that you don't overload the system, because some of these things get stored in different areas of the body, like especially fat cells. And then when they recirculate into the bloodstream, that's when people get really not fun side effects. So you just have to start low and go slow, basically.
Absolutely. I'm a huge fan, are you guys, of the Quicksilver lab testing methodology.
I love Quicksilver. I've attended their trainings, huge fan, love their supplements. Sorry, were you referring to the specific testing though that they do?
Oh, I mean,
or-
I love what they've created
Yeah,
over time,
yeah.
but yeah, they're gold standard in testing, you know, from the perspective and even their proprietary algorithm, which I've seen evolve over time as well, which basically looks at, you know, blood, urine, and even hair to determine what you're exposed to versus what you're eliminating versus, you know, how the body is behaving in the process of elimination over time due to challenge or a provocation of so you just going into your doctor and saying, hey, test me for mercury. I guess the point here is that, you know, that's from major acute exposure, and there's a WMIS guide that will tell you wherever you work, if there's mercury in your environment, that heavy loads of that beyond a ridiculous amount might show up in blood, beyond which your body, to your point, does a great job of displacing it so as to hopefully not impact the nervous system. Wants to get it out of circulation, so the brain and nervous system is protected. That's why it goes into fat tissue, right? But Quicksilver is just a wonderful you know, outfit that does gold standard for their you know, blood, hair, urinary tests, and their algorithm to determine what's being exposed, what you're exposed to, what's circulating, and how you're effectively detoxifying it, right? So I think that's one thing people should look into. But knowing at the very least your detox pathways and how they're working genetically, to first understand, you know, how you go about dealing with any mercury toxicity, including amalgam fillings, is really key.
Yeah, and yeah, it is in North America, often people don't have super high levels, but sometimes they do. It can happen. It's not necessarily as common as mold, let's say. But if you've traveled in Asia, like one of my patients had spent extensive time in East Asia, and that's how she got significant levels of mercury. Or if you have the amalgams, like one of our viewers mentioned, or yeah, if you eat a lot of sushi, unfortunately, that is definitely a big source. And I usually recommend smash fish. That's like an acronym for salmon, mackerel, anchovies, sardines, and herring. So the small fish are less likely to accumulate heavy metals over time. So that's something else to take into consideration. Quicksilver would be a good way to test. You can also do the hair test. I'm not sure if Quicksilver also does the hair test. They do. Okay, so they do everything. And then there's also Total Tox. That's another one I've used, a urinary toxin test. So it's great to have your detox genes as well as one of those tests. Total Tox would more be like kind of like a broad net, like what does my toxic burden look like? And you can look at it in a more general way.
Yeah, and I want to underscore once more that when you go through, you know, dietary modifications, that ultimately, whether they're healthy and or you're just doing a fast, you know, or you're modifying based on your genomic insights, when you lose a significant amount of weight, hopefully mostly fat tissue, you will recycle. I don't know if you guys remember, might be too young, the Biosphere 2 experiment somewhere in the Nevada desert. Anyways, this is way back. NASA was in charge of this. They put people in this self-contained environment to see if they could replicate it, like, you know, on Mars or whatever. But for 6 months or something. Anyways, inside this, you know, glass-contained biosphere, you know, they were trying to survive on self-grown foods, etc. And I don't know, they lost some crazy like 25% of their body weight over that time. And at the end of it, on their biometrics, they were all studied the wazoo for everything. They were mercury toxic. There was no mercury in there. But they had heavy metals beyond mercury, but there was a high level, and they were all experiencing, significant fatigue, et cetera. But they realized, the scientists, that a lot of this related back to this acute heavy metal exposure due to what was released from their fat tissues.
Wow.
They lost weight. And by the way, another oldie but goodie, I say oldie, it's not even that old, but Rick Smith and Bruce Laurie wrote the book. I've never seen one replicated since. You see that? Tox in, tox out. Oh, they did tox in, tox out, but also slow death. Yeah, slow death by rubber duck. These guys were amazing. They put themselves captive into their an apartment, and they just did crazy stuff like, extra use of foaming shaving gels and high amounts of tuna from cans, and did the bookend tests, right? And these guys were like, I don't know, 1,000 times or some crazy amount fold excess for mercury at the end of it, and they blamed obviously canned tuna on that. So we can quickly understand our genetic predispositions and our aptitude for detox, but avoidance in the first place, that's the best ways forward. So there are biosafe dentists who will use rubber dams and high velocity suctions, and they're trying to make sure they're safe as well as you're safe. Find those that take out the mercury in a safe way, and maybe consider, especially if you're working with Dr. Sapp or somebody who knows DMSO, DMSA, chelating agents, with track records. By the way, I should say we have at least a couple of really incredible clinicians who deal specifically with heavy metals on our team at the DNA company. So get in touch if you're questioning. This is maybe a major contributing factor for you.
Angel, was she one of them? There's a couple.
Lynn's amazing. Yeah.
Exactly. And I actually wrote a paper on that exact study, which doesn't make me sound like a nerd at all. Thanks for bringing it up and reminding me, Bryce. Yeah, don't eat canned tuna every day. That would be enough. Yeah.
So, Barbara, here's one for you, Jess, and maybe reiterate some of what we touched on, but package it all up. What supplements, what nutraceutical ingredients are essential to support mitochondria? And or, by the way, can the right foods, exercise, and sleep take care of it completely on its own? Loaded question, but go.
It is a bit of a loaded question, right? Because it's really like when I talk about general to specific, the place to start is no doubt the right foods. Like you have to start with just those basics, the nutrition, the sleep, the exercise. Absolutely. Weightlifting in and of itself will increase the number of mitochondrial density in those muscles, right? So just using your body for what it's designed for in the first place, absolutely is the place to start. Problem is, if you do have, let's say, a genetic malfunction there, right, like suboptimal genes, then that might not be enough. And you can't necessarily eat your way into clinical ranges for some of these things. So, like, for example, urolithin A is one of the ingredients that I talk about because it directly causes new mitochondria to be built. It's got a direct effect on the mitochondria. And it's really an extract of pomegranates, but you have to have a particular gut makeup in order to actually get urolithin A out of pomegranates, because it's what's called a postbiotic. So it gets created in the microbiome in response to the intake of pomegranates if you have the right makeup. If you don't, you can eat pomegranates all day, every day until you get diarrhea. You are not going to make the 500 milligrams or so necessary of urolithin A. And that's going to have a direct, effect on the mitochondria. So I think that it's the place to start, but I don't think that you can necessarily get everything that you need, especially nowadays, right? I mean, Bryce talked about glyphosate and mineral deficient soils. We know what we've done to the food supply, unfortunately. So supplementing is useful because we can isolate the nutrients themselves and take them in a particular quantity that we have control over, right? So that's the value in supplementing. It's not about one or the other. Usually a supplement complements an already well orchestrated diet. And that's where we start. Dr. Sapp mentioned tocotrienols, right? There's tocopherols and there's tocotrienols. When it comes to vitamin E, tocotrienols are definitely the one that's the best. Ubiquinol, that's a form of CoQ10 that's really potent and useful. PQQ is something that we put in our mitochondrial optimizer, a great antioxidant, and I'm a fan of it. I'll actually share, I've been doing this experiment with urolithin A where it's combined with Akkermansia, which is like a probiotic strain, and it helps to sort of nourish the terrain and make it so that urolithin A can kind of take root better and do its job better. So I'm taking a supplement right now that's urolithin A and Akkermansia, and then it's got some prebiotic fibers in there like apple pectin and different things. And apparently it actually helps your microbiome to make more urolithin A. So I'll update you guys on our next mitochondrial webinar as to whether or not that worked. I'm a fan of ketone esters, manganese. I mean, it's manganese is directly needed for the SOD2 pathway, so that's a great ingredient as well. What did I miss, you guys?
Pretty comprehensive, man.
That was pretty comprehensive. NAC, glutathione, ubiquinol, tocotrienols, vitamin E, manganese,
Urolithin A.
magnesium, vitamin C.
Yeah, I would just say again, the B complex, but in the way that your body requires it or best appreciates it. And that would be based on some of the methylation genes to know what form of folate, what form of B12, and of course, B3 is a main driver, right? Nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide requires niacin. And I like some of the cheaper, there's some controversy. You and I, Justin, were back and forth about NMN versus NR. And, you know, if you talk to David Sinclair, the Harvard, anti-aging group, they're going to promote NMN. You talk to Dr. Charles Brenner, he's going to tell you all about nicotinamide riboside, NR. The race here in science is the quickest downstream to get to NAD, which is, of course, then the direct precursor to energy. But it's got to get in the cell first. That's number one. Then, of course, there are certain genes that may be downregulated by NMN. I mean, this is kind of some new stuff. Dr. Charles Brenner talks about this. It seems nicotinamide riboside might actually be the one that's safest and may win the race. But I'm a huge fan of combining B3, even non-flushing niacinamide with D-ribose. You can upregulate NAD. Good science has shown with those two inexpensive ingredients. So I would just add that as my 2 cents. The B complex family, particularly B3, D-ribose, and if you got a lot of money to spend, maybe NMN, but maybe more likely NR.
And Bryce, thank you so much for bringing up the B vitamins again, because I could get up on my soapbox about that, because the report is so helpful for showing you, the ideal forms of folate and B12. And this is an area in functional medicine where people have gone a little bit far in just promoting the methylated B vitamins all the time. And I can't even tell you how many times I've seen like agitation, anxiety, headaches as a result of taking the wrong B vitamin, especially B12. So the report helps you weed that out and figure out the best forms. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah. Not to mention indirectly Sammy maybe, but
Sammy,
for another day. Dirk is asking, Dirk always has great questions. Dirk is often joining us as part of these webinars, and I've never seen a bad question. He's asking if amino acids can be used for energy. Are they converted to glucose or ketones for the mitochondria to use in ATP? Well, yeah, there are, yeah, so this is what I mean. He's always asking good questions. There are glucogenic amino acids, which are actually indirectly sort of primarily used to manage blood glucose. And we often talk about this in relation to some of the genes, TCF7L2, that might predispose one to being less responsive to high blood sugar levels. But ketogenic are those other amino acids that are used to produce ketones. So it's neither are producing glucose directly. There's that, oh my gosh, this is getting complicated. Point is, if and when the body is in a state of sort of low glucose, it goes to ketone, and then after that, you're sort of eating your muscles if you have to, so it's not, it really, as I mentioned earlier, amino acids, especially the essentials, branch chain, otherwise, leucine. I mean, Justin, I'm sure you are, Dr. Sapp as well, huge fans of branch chain and downstream for these because this prevents sarcopenia, and we all have that as well as we age. And if we're losing muscle mass, we're losing mitochondrial function. That's a direct correlation. So I think the downstream leucine, you know, and some of the supplements you can take that way are also helpful. But Dirk, you can convert in a state of famish, you can convert almost anything except rock soup into energy if you have to. Echo Lee is asking also, can you speak about the genetics of mitochondria and the mystery around, the mother's contribution? You guys want to have a stab at that?
You get your mitochondria from your mother? Well, I didn't, and I don't think she'd mind me sharing that. So it depends, because if you look at, like, let's say the SOD2 gene, you have two alleles, right? One from each parent. So in that sense, you don't get your mitochondria from your mother, but I don't know if you know, kind of any other research around that, Bryce.
Well, the fact that mitochondria have their own DNA, that's of course separate to the nuclear DNA. Of course, to your point, you know, we don't necessarily get the influence of SOD2 and all these other factors that influence mitochondria function from our mom. But the really cool thing is, you know, that of course our mitochondria is of course our mom's mitochondria, and it's just so unique to you know, that lineage, and some of the you know, interesting research around the contribution, or what we call, I guess, the mystery of that maternal contribution is tracing lineage. And this is basically how 23andMe operates. You know, it's used in evolutionary biology and genealogy to trace maternal lineages and human migrations over thousands and maybe hundreds of thousands of years. But we're not in the business of that. You know, 23andMe is just fun. It's interesting. You know, I think it's cool. But really the health insights are minimal. You know, and then you know, I'm not, maybe you can explain further, because I know that there is some, it's rare, some studies have identified cases of paternal mitochondrial DNA inheritance. Is that what you were talking about, suggesting possibility of unique exceptions?
It is kind of like, even though you might literally get your mitochondria from your mother, just in terms of like the genetic influences, if you have two alleles for some mitochondrial genes, you'll have the influence of both your father and your mother.
Right.
Kind of what
It's
I'm getting at.
rare, very rare.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's what you meant. Oh, fine. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I know that that's
Yeah,
emerging
that is what I
science.
meant. It
Oh,
is from both parents, the factors that affect the mitochondria.
right. And how about the three-parent babies? How does that go again? So in cases of, like, you know, inherited mitochondrial diseases, right? There's that technique, I can't remember what it's called, but you know, it allows the defective maternal mitochondria with healthy donor mitochondria. So you actually have like three-parent babies. So I don't know. I think I might have seen a
On
Netflix
my scope,
special
but
about this.
yeah.
Anyways, digress. So let's get to I'm going to come back to Dirk's questions, as we answered some, and we're coming up to the end of the hour, and I'll come back to you, Dirk. But Corey's asking, which system in DNA reports will I find my mitochondrial info? Yeah, Josh, you want to ramble that off again?
Yeah, so within there's the anti-inflammatory kind of cascade that we look at, which includes a whole bunch of things, right? Methylation, vitamin D, glutathionization, and antioxidation. I think that's the most like pinpointed area, because that's what actually goes over what we've been talking about, the SOD2 and the GPX, your body's ability to clear free radicals at the level of the mitochondria. I think that's the most direct pathway. But again, none of these are n equals 1. I mean, you could argue that, you know, we've talked about TCF7L2, we've talked about macronutrient digestion, we've talked about methylation. I think all of it does have some relation to the mitochondria, bearing in mind every cell in your body has mitochondria in there except for red blood cells, right? So I mean, even your executive function profile, I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of mitochondria per brain cell, because your brain uses up to 25% of your body's ATP, even though it's only like 3% of your actual body weight. It's really crazy, right? So the energy demands of the cell are what dictate how dense they are in mitochondria. And the genes that we landed on with our DNA 360 speak to pretty much every cell in the body. I mean, what isn't covered by what we have in our 6 systems? The hormone system matters. The diet segment matters. Glutathione matters, right? So the antioxidative pathway is direct, but I would argue pretty much everything is indirect and matters for the mitochondria. So look at it all.
Yeah, as an example, I've had some clients who assumed, well, one person I'm thinking of in particular, that they had bad mitochondria. And then when they got their results back, it turned out that their fatigue was maybe more related to methylation or detox, their cognitive profile. Their more specific mitochondrial genes were optimal. So, yeah.
Well, and you said it earlier, Dr. Sapp. I mean, if you're sleeping 4, 5, 6 hours a night, hello, sleep 8. Probably one of the fastest ways to more look, they need to repair. They need to multiply, need to do their job to help the detoxification pathways, et cetera. You don't sleep enough. That brain fog, I mean, we don't have lymphatic systems to help us, sort of manage the excess inflammation and toxins in our brain. We rely on glymph or the glial cells, non-thinking cells, and they rely on mitochondria. So if you don't allow them the time, it's literally time, not just the hours you clock on the pillow, but of course, executive function bleeds over here, the deep reparative sleep. But if you're not getting that, I'm sorry, you're going to be in mitochondrial deficit. And then this is another one, Jess, you might as well just jump right into. Wendy is asking, she's got a sluggish. She thinks she's got a, she may have done her 360 and other tests, but sluggish liver, has a hard time with oxidative stress, metabolic dysfunction. Are there peptides that can help repair? I know you're a fan of the BPC 157. There's some others, but do you want to give her, sort of your top line around the peptides that are becoming more popularized?
Yeah, and I have to, of course, make the disclaimer that I'm not allowed to officially recommend peptides. So I'm going to go ahead and say, do your research on the things that I'm about to say. 5-amino 1-MQ is one of the better ones that directly operates on the mitochondrial pathway. So that's definitely one to look at. There's another one called MOTC, MOTC. And that's also a great mitochondrial upregulator, according to the research. Do your research. There's ones directly for the brain that can actually improve brain mitochondria. So I think P21, N-acetyl C-max is another one. Dihexa. These are all brain-focused peptides, but part of their goal is to boost BDNF, and another part of their goal is to increase mitochondrial function within the brain. So it kind of depends on where the area is. I mean, if you have a sluggish liver, you may want to consider some of the more antioxidative peptides like a carbon 60, something to increase that pathway. Because if you have liver congestion, right, and you can test that, by the way. If you have like elevated urinary bile acids, right, UBAs, it's a good sign that you have some sort of liver congestion, and you may need a TUDCA or even just the basics, NAC and milk thistle and things to help kind of get that going. But carbon 60 is one that I've used myself. 5-amino 1-MQ is one I've used myself. BPC is very useful for lots of stuff because, once again, maybe this is stemming from a mucosal barrier issue. You don't know, right? Unless you've done a mucosal barrier assessment. And that's one of the things BPC does, is really strengthen that. Same with lorazepam. Lorazepam does the same thing. It helps to tighten up those junctions within the gut. So if you know where the actual issue is, that helps a lot. But that's a decent list to at least get you started when it comes to peptides. It's a crazy world, peptides, and burgeoning research all the time on that one.
Somebody ought and gotta do a study on GLP-1s versus those MOTS, for that indirect, direct insulin sensitivity and metabolic dysfunction. I think there's something there. Coming up to time, guys, we still have a bunch of questions. Let's hammer out maybe just a few more real quick. Tips for better sleep. Diane's asking, again, cortisol, hypoglycemia, stress, where does she start? I'm hoping, Diane, that you've got your 360. There's a huge siloed sleep report in there, and that will inform, again, where you invest your time, energy, and maybe even money into optimizing sleep hygiene. You definitely want to start there. Maria is asking about, we mentioned ApoE, did we? And I'm trying to understand my DNA written report, and ApoE shows a number of copies, but in the spreadsheet, okay, this is a little bit in the weeds. Maria, reach out to us by email. Somebody's going to put the best email. One of our clinicians will help you understand this better. Specific, might be one of us, but one of our clinicians will answer that very detailed question. Lisa's asking, can you talk about the effect of chronic inflammation? Well, Dr. Sepp, chronic inflammation in a minute or less and its relationship to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah, I mean, like Justin keeps bringing up, they're all tied, right? But if you have an activated immune system, and it's inappropriately activated, you're reacting to all kinds of things in the environment. Just the activation of those cytokines, the inflammatory cytokines will cause inflammation. Two of the basic blood tests you can do are ESR and CRP, although in my experience, they don't actually catch a lot of inflammation. But basically you want an anti-inflammatory diet. It's usually like higher in vegetables, higher in protein, lower in sugars, and refined grains, higher in fish oil. You want a detox, obviously. You want to take your B vitamins, and you want to take the right B vitamins because those help methylation, which helps quench inflammation. Was it more like strategies for lowering inflammation? Just double checking.
Yeah, that was it. You nailed it. What could we say? Inflammation is a whole other webinar, maybe a multitude of webinars. Justin, recommendation of microbiome tests that we offer with the DNA 360 and those with suspected compromised microbiomes. I mean, kind of a no-brainer. There's so much we have to offer, but those two are really some of our.
Yeah, the gut 360 that we offer is certainly good, right? Because we look at microbiome diversity, we look at phylobalance, we look at pathogenic species, and then we also look at beneficial species. And we just look at alpha diversity, like the different types of strains that are in there. And if you have a lot of elevated pathogenic species in there and too much proteobacteria, it's called, that's a pretty good indicator in and of itself that there's a dysbiosis and possibly mucosal barrier weakness in there. There is, people will test zonulin. There's also another thing called indican, and that's an indicator as well of, weak mucosal barrier. So those are a couple of pretty good markers that you can look at. And then there's tons of ways to repair it, right? I mentioned BPC and lorazepatide. There's, bone broths, collagens, glutamine, colostrum, but those markers would be the ones that I look at. Indican and zonulin, those are among your better ones.
And it's not in the literature, and it did indican for a long time. I'm just saying, theoretically, I think that there is reason to consider false negative findings on an indican litmus with individuals that are optimal 5-HTTL-PR TPH2 combined. I'm just saying theoretical, but I have a feeling because it relies on some of that amino acid profile and manufacturing fermentation of tryptophan in the gut. You want to end us off here, Dr. Sapp, from a Nat who's asking, how do we handle the methylation problem? I mean, there's very specific ways, is overly simplified, but we handle it how?
Yeah. I mean, ideally you'd get your, the methylation problem. Ideally you'd get your methylation genes tested, and you'd find out, like, do you need a liquid B12, like the FUT2 gene, will tell you, like, maybe your gut's not absorbing B12. Other genes will tell you, whether you should take a methylated folate or folinic acid. Folinic acid tends to be our preference, or my preference. It tends to be a little more hypoallergenic, less likely to cause a reaction. And then other genes will tell you whether you should take methylated B12 or just stick to the hypoallergenic, which would be either adenosine cobalamin or hydroxocobalamin. I haven't seen too many people get a negative reaction to the methylated B12 in when it's injected, but I've seen many people get a negative reaction if they overdo it and they have certain genes when it's in oral form. So the methylation problem is really just getting the right cofactors, the right B vitamins in the cycle, potentially SAM-E, because that's a cofactor. And I love that supplement for mood, but again, there are certain genetic factors that you have to take into account. And you don't want to overburden the cycle with methyl groups, because that's when you over-methylate and you get into that whole agitation, headaches, anxiety zone. And then you just want anything that can lower inflammation. Like if you have poor methylation, suboptimal methylation, you want to get on an anti-inflammatory diet. You want to take omega-3s, maybe turmeric, and the right B vitamins. So that's kind of like the starter pack, I would say.
Love it. Love it all. You guys have any final thoughts before we wrap? We're over time, which is great. A lot of amazing questions tonight. I'm going to give the award to best questions to Dirk, so we didn't get through all of them. But folks, we have an amazing special going on, $65 off, no code necessary. It's the new year, not just new year, new you. If you have a loved one or a family member who's looking to go from problem to solution with a health concern, or even just good to better, let them know, even if you've had your own done. Don't keep it to yourself. Share this. But do you guys have any burning, itching additions before we kind of wrap for tonight? That was a lot of stuff.
It was a lot of stuff. Yeah, this is the year of anti-aging for us. You know, like let's try to, at the beginning of 2026, actually be younger than we were at the beginning of 2025. I think mitochondria are a huge piece of that conversation. And we've got a lot of webinars coming up as well about inflammation, all kinds of things. So stay tuned, because you're going to get a lot of good info in the recent future.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. Reverse aging is possible. And I'll leave you with that. Improving your mitochondrial health, improving your energy is possible. It's all a matter of having the patience to figure out the drivers. And you can start with your genetics, find a practitioner, and you will slowly get better. So that's it.
A lot of actionable insights. Protect, optimize these little cellular organelles, guys. They fuel your energy, your vitality. We said it in the beginning, your longevity, being reminded here by my colleagues. So remember, really small, actionable steps like diet, nutrition, managing stress, supporting sleep, all that stuff is going to add healthy years to your life. Change the day you die. So take what you learned tonight and start building health span. Starts now. Like Just said, 2025 is the year. Here's to thriving, not just surviving. Isn't that one of your taglines, Justin?
No, that's your tagline, Bryce.
That's
but
mine. All right, fine. I own it. All right, guys, have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, guys. Thank you.